بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله وحبيبه أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we gather together to commemorate the anniversary of the martyrdom of the fifth Imam, Imam Muhammad Al-Baqir alayhi salam. A very significant Imam, without whose essential presence the school of thought of our madhab would not have had the same configurations today. And we are here to commemorate him because of the fact that he had seen a lot of suffering in his life. He was about 3 or 4 years old when he accompanied Imam Hussein alayhi salam to Karbala with his father, Imam Zain al-Abidin. And he had seen the martyrdom of his father. He had seen the rise of the Umayyad dynasty. And because of his policies, he and his father were marginalized in the Shia community for a long period of time. And so I would like to talk a little bit about the historical conditions that surrounded this great Imam and see what lessons we can learn from him and in the struggles that he had to face. It all goes back to the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Because up to that point, for the Shias, succession to the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi was something straightforward. To them, the presence of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhim salam, it was absolutely clear who the Imam was. Also, it was clear that the Imam was someone who was in a direct position of opposition to the regime. Even though, for example, Imam Hassan alayhi salam had had a treaty with Muawiyah, you only have treaties between people who have some kind of opposition to each other. And so this continued until the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, at which point the Shia, and when we say Shia, I think maybe the better word would be proto-Shia, because as a madhab, the school of thought of the AhlulBayt was not something that was clearly defined. And so you had, because of this lack of definition, you had people being open to confusion. Also, coupled with this would be the excesses of the Bani Umayyah and the racist policies they had to what we call the Mawali. The Mawali were the non-Arab subjects who were aligned or had to be aligned to particular Arab tribes for protection and for the receipt of social support. And you found that in the midst of all of this discontent, people tended to look at the imams for some kind of guidance. They all forgot that from the moment the Khilafat passed to Abu Bakr and skipped Ali, the Khilafat entered into the realm of worldly politics. It entered into the realm of playing upon images, upon public relations. It entered into the realm where the rulers of the Muslim community need not be the most pious, but need be the most shrewd, or needs be the most forceful. And so this is the reason why Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he was offered the Khilafat at the assassination of Uthman, had said that this Khilafat is not worth more to me than the sneeze of a goat, or it is not worth more to me than my shoes that I'm mending. And so the Imams, Zain al-Abidin, Imam Muhammad Al-Baqir, alayhim salam, and all of the Imams that came after them up to before Imam Mahdi, alayhi salam, Imam Al-Askari, all of them had a hands-off attitude towards the Khilafat. All of them had a hands-off attitude towards taking sides. And because the environment at the time was also oppressive, and the Shias were exposed to the idea of Mahdaviyat, and exposed to the idea of the Imam of the time rising up against oppressor or the oppressor, could not see themselves within the scope of spiritual history and take their cue from the Imam and know what to do. And so the Shias started to fall into error. Because of Imam Zain al-Abidin's quietist policy of not being involved, many of them abandoned him and went into the camp of other people who claimed imamat and promised to set them free by the sword. This environment at that time was an environment of revolution. It was an environment of rebellion. The brutal killing of the Imam Hussein and his family, the only surviving family of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was something that exposed the very nature, the true nature of the Bani Umayyah. And that, coupled with their profligacy, their excesses in wine drinking and corruption, just only set them off more in the hearts of people when they compared themselves to those pious members of the AhlulBayt alayhim salam. And so many of the people were revolting here and there and all over the place. But Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam remained aloof from all of this. And one case in point, for example, is when the Medina's people rose up. The Imam left the city and went and stayed outside the city in order to show that he was not part of this. To the extent that Marwan, who was the governor of Medina at the time, forced to flee, went to the Imam for help in looking after his wife, and the Imam agreed to help him. This was the nature of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. The man who had seen the oppressions that they had inflicted upon his people, upon his family, would at the same time be the recipient of a trust from an enemy of the Ahlul Bayt because he is following on the prophetic path. There's a hadith by Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam where he says, "We are those who obey, who maintain the trusts. If the murderer of Imam Ali alayhi salam would come to me and give me a trust, I will see to it that that trust be honored. This is the nature of the Imams in our time. When the Medinans were defeated at the Battle of Hara, it becomes very significant that Yazid's response in this defeat was looting and rape and pillage, and also forcing the people of Medina to give bay'ah to him, that he will be their slaves, bay'ah as their slaves. But Imam Zain al-Abidin and his family were exempt from this. The Imam alayhi salam also indicated his neutrality in the struggle between the Umayyads and Abdullah ibn Zubayr. When Abdullah ibn Zubayr, for example, he was not a member of the AhlulBayt, but Abdullah ibn Zubayr was logically, like many non-followers of the AhlulBayt, alayhim salam, was logically asking the question, why should the governorship, why should the rulership of the Muslims only be in the hands of one family? Why not the Quraysh, which many of the believers in the prophetic Sunnah, in the Sunni tradition, where where he says that the leadership of the Muslims will always be in Quraysh, the Quraysh should have a type of electoral council to be able to select who the Imam would be or who the Khalif would be. And because he saw the Banu Umayyah as people who were illegitimate, people who were not representing the ethos of Islam, and because he saw that they wanted to monopolize this for themselves, he also rose up. So the time of Imam Zain al-Abidin coming around to the end of his life, and the time of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir was characterized by many of these types of questions under which this idea of khilafat or rulership should fall. Incidentally, our Sunni brothers talk about the fact, they say the fact, the so-called fact, that the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, never selected a successor to him, that he left it up to the community to do so. And we say that it is only in the wisdom of the Prophet for him to do so. And this proves our point, because we see the amount of chaos and killing and murder and wrong treatment coming out of this whole issue of the Khilafat. Give salawat to the Holy Prophet Muhammad and his family. One of the Shia factions that came to the Imam, to Imam Al-Baqir, for support was Mukhtar. Mukhtar, who was leading a revolt against the Umayyads. The Imam did not give him that support, and he turned around and went to Muhammad ibn Hanafiya. Muhammad ibn Hanafiya is the son of Imam Ali alayhi salam, but from another person, another wife, a Hanafiya wife, who, by being silent on Mukhtar's selection, gave, in a sense, tacit approval for him to use his name. And so Mukhtar, in the name of Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, led a revolt, and in that revolt exacted vengeance on many of the killers of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Nevertheless, it is very significant that the Shia were at this point willing and able to choose Muhammad ibn Hanafiya as their Imam. So one of the things that was very significant here is that the Shia, the idea of imamat and the legitimacy of imamat, how do you legitimize an imam? How do you identify an imam? This was a very important question that needed to be clarified. With the death of Imam Zain al-Abidin, many of the Shias turned to Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, because many of them desperately wanted to be free of the Umayyad yoke. Because of the quietist policies of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam and Imam Muhammad Al-Baqir, the Umayyads themselves started to see the AhlulBayt because of their status as a group that had excellent morals and had a high status in society. They started to see this. They were no longer able to be distracted by seeing them as a forum for political revolt. And this is what helped the Shia school of thought to survive. Because in all of the cases where people had risen up against the rulership of the time, in all of these cases, all of them came to an unhappy end. All of them did not arrive at their goal. And the Imams were aware of what path the destiny of the Islamic Ummah must go, and that these people had a role to play in that particular destiny. So we have on one side a type of crisis, a type of ignorance with respect to the leadership on the side of the Shia, insofar as they did not know clearly what is the best way to identify the Imam. Because by the time Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam comes around, you have many people, not just one or two, many people who on the outside could seem to be a candidate for imamat. Zayd, the founder of the Zaydi school of thought, was a son of Imam Zain al-Abidin. And Zayd himself, in one of his actions, legitimized Abu Bakr and Omar as legitimate imams because they were voted on or they were selected by the community. This is Zayd, who is a son of the Imam. This type of action makes Zayd's movement to be more broad, to be broader in scope, to be able to pull in both Shias and people who are Sunnis. And Sunnis, again, also at that time, we call them proto-Sunnis. At that point in time, things were still gelling. The schools of thought were becoming more and more defined. So as one great historian said, Imam Muhammad Baqir had to steer the Shia community between the activists and Sunni synthesis. And what I mean by Sunni synthesis is because the school of thought was absorbing different strains of thought in it, like, for example, Zaydiyah. So here the Imam had this important role to play, this sensitive role to play, in a situation where he is basically isolated, in a situation where all of the Muslims are looking at him and saying, well, you're not doing anything. You're not rising up. You're not giving speeches against the system. Why should I be following you? I should be following Zayd. I should be following this one and that one. Zayd himself, for example, said the Imam is the one who uses the sword to assert his rights. And so if you didn't use a sword, then you are not an Imam. So Imam Baqir alayhi salam asked him, well, then you don't accept the Imam of your father then? Because your father, Zayn al-Abidin, did not use the sword. Zayd had no answer to this. And then other Shias had questioned him again and said to him, well, what about Imam Ali alayhi salam? Before he went to battle, was he an Imam or was he not? Zayd refused to answer. But we see this crisis in understanding with respect to who the Imam should be and what the responsibility of the Imam should be. On the side of the Umayyad, you had the same problem. You had the problem of the attempt to establish a dynasty, a family in power, which the majority of Muslims were not prepared to accept. And especially with the death of Yazid, which was a pretty sudden and untimely death. He was quite young, maybe I think in his 40s or so. You had a crisis because the only person that came to mind in order to rule the Muslim world was Abdullah ibn Zubayr. The people automatically thought of Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Abdullah ibn Zubayr at that time had occupied Mecca. And in fact, for about 10 years or so, Abdullah ibn Zubayr behaved like a caliph, sending governors to different parts of the world, the Muslim world, to govern. So you had a case of confusion in the ranks of the Bani Umayyah. You had a state of confusion at that time. And one group of people decided to, the Banu Qalb decided to bring Marwan. Marwan, who was the advisor to Uthman, as the proposed candidate for the Umayyad Khalifa. And so Marwan came, and they defeated the other group. There was another group in Syria that wanted to follow Abdullah ibn Zubayr. They defeated that group, and so Marwan came and established this Khilafah. At this point, we have in the Arabian Peninsula a state of practical disorder. You had the Khawarij, the Kharijites, who controlled large areas of Arabia. Then you had the Shia movement. Some of them call them the Hashimiyya. And then you had the different other tribal allegiances that were competing with each other. Marwan's system, Marwan reformed the system, tightened up his control, and because the Syrian group was more disciplined, succeeded in defeating all of them and creating an even greater centralization and power in the hands of the Bani Umayyah. It is at this point we find in the Muslim world the creation of distinct coinage. We find the centralization of authority. We find a lot of administrative developments that started to take place. Now, what we see is that one of the major tasks of Imam Muhammad Al-Baqir alayhi salam was the responsibility to clarify, to put into perspective, to create a distinct Shia school of thought. And one of the most important ones among them was to clarify how the Imam would be legitimized. And he is the one who popularized or made clear to us the idea of Nas, the idea of a personal selection by the Imam before that legitimizes that particular Imam. He clarified that the Imam, for example, is an Imam who is descended from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam through Hazrat Fatima, as opposed to some of the other Shias who saw it as an Alid or Alawi type of Imam, where it is related to Imam Ali. He clarified these things. He also clarified the fiqh that was among the Shia. For example, many of the Shia before the Imam were practicing a kind of a mixed type of fiqh, where they would be following proto-Sunni elements and also based upon what teachings came to them from the AhlulBayt alayhim salam. One of the reasons why the Shia was so in disarray is because most of the knowledgeable people were killed in Karbala, and also after that among the penitents, the Tawabun, that rose up against the Bani Umayyah. And so, for example, you found that Shias in, for example, Kufa were following the teachings of the Ahlul Hadith, who were largely based upon the fatwa of Omar. And so you have hadith, for example, where one person is saying, I went to Imam Al-Baqir about wiping on the shoes. You know, for many of our Sunni brothers, where they do wudu over the socks, right, over the leather socks. And the Imam said to him, you don't do this because this is not something that Imam Ali alayhi salam did. What is in the book is in the book, in the Holy Quran, and what they are doing is something that comes after the Holy Quran. And you found many, many cases of things like this, where the Imam explicates and clarifies the fiqh of the Shia. We find, for example, in also things like theology, the Imam is also very, very explicit and teaching the Shia the proper way of thinking on a theological basis. Not only was he knowledgeable and famous for his knowledge among the Shia, but he was also famous for his knowledge among the Sunnis as well. And so you find that in many, many of the Sunni books, they mention him as a source of many hadith. In one narration, he says, sometimes I mention a hadith and I don't say the chain of transmission, but the chain of transmission goes through me, goes through my father, goes through my grandfather, my great-grandfather, up to the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so the Imam concentrated his efforts on the intellectual development of the Muslim Ummah. The Muslim Ummah in general and the Shia community in particular. And this is something that I think we could learn from the Imams. For example, the idea of coinage was something that the Imam had suggested to the Khalif for him to do. Before that, they were using the old coins based upon the old empires, the old Byzantine and Sassanid empires. He was behaving the same way like Imam Ali alayhi salam. Insofar as the knowledge and advice is not something that you restrict to just people who follow you or people who agree with you or people who you like. But knowledge and advice is something that is open for all. It doesn't mean to say that you support them in what they do, but you will be helping them in doing good, in doing that which is best. The Imams are teaching us that in a time where the overwhelming power is in the hands, the overwhelming military power and economic power is in the hands of those people who are inimical of truth and justice, that the best thing to do is not necessarily to rise up. You rise up only when you have the right organization, when you have the right strategy, when you have the right politics, when you have the right people who have the right foresight to be able to know what to do. That's when you rise up. In the meantime, what you do is you increase yourself in knowledge. What you do is you impart that knowledge to others. What you do is you offer a helping hand. What you do is you advise others where they ask you for advice. And in this way, you build up a movement which, after a long time in history, its time will come to pass where it will be able to rise up and create a just system. Give salawat to the Holy Prophet Muhammad and his family. He is known as Al-Baqir. He is known as Al-Baqir. And this name Al-Baqir, which means the splitter, it means the one who cleaves open. This comes from the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him himself. There's a hadith mentioned where the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi says to Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, إِنَّكَ سَتَدْرُكَ رَجُلًا مِنِّي اسْمُهُ اسْمِي وَشُمَائِلُهُ شُمَائِلِي يَبْقَرُ الْعِلْمَ بَقْرًا. He said, you will see a man, because he's telling Jabir, and Jabir in the time of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir is the oldest and only companion of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that is living at the time. And he was a follower of the Imam Muhammad al-Baqir. He said to him, Jabir, you will see a man from my household. His name will be like my name. His features will resemble mine and will split knowledge completely. Imam Baqir alayhi salam, he himself said, indeed, the truth, harboring falsehood in its midst, cried out for assistance from me. The truth, with falsehood in its midst, cried out for assistance from me. You see, brothers and sisters, falsehood does not exist by itself. Falsehood cannot exist by itself. It is like sin. Sin, or evil, better yet evil, is something that cannot exist by itself because it has a negative meaning. It is the absence of something rather than the presence of something. The absence of soft-heartedness and mercy is cruelty. It is not the presence of cruelty, but the absence of soft-heartedness. Ignorance is the absence of knowledge, not the presence of non-knowledge. You hear what I'm saying? There's no such thing as not knowledge or non-knowledge. There is a state of the absence of knowledge. The Imam is saying the truth, harboring falsehood in its midst. Falsehood could only present itself to us as truth. Falsehood could only present itself to us in an argument that is warped, that makes you think it's real. A false system can be created, but it cannot last. It cannot last. When we look at this society today, they're trying to create economic reality in society without changing the system, without changing oppressive banking practices, without changing greed. You can't do it. He says, in that time, the truth and the falsehood were mixed. And people were seeing falsehood in the eyes of truth. He said, and I cleaved it open from the side and disclosed the truth from its veils until it became manifest and widespread after being concealed and hidden. This is the role, this is the duty of the Imams. And not just the Imams, but this is our duty, because the followers are nothing but the extension of the leaders. The Imams and Holy Prophet and his family have all said this. They have likened the AhlulBayt, the Holy Prophet, as, alayhim salam, as a tree. The branches are Fatima and Imam Ali alayhi salam. And the leaves on these branches are the Shia. So as a Shia, we have to take that same route. We have to take that same stance. We have to be able to distinguish the truth from the falsehood and to be able to present it to people. And when they see the truth, they would come to Islam. You know, sometimes I would do tabligh among Christians. And I would never tell them your Bible is corrupt and is distorted and so forth and so on. No. The best thing to do is to show them how to understand their own Bible. To show them where the truth is in their own Bible. Something their priests can't do for them. Their ministers can't do for them. But you as a Muslim can do for them if you know it. And it is much easier for them to come into the deen than you to start arguing with them about, God's name is Allah, not God, and so forth and so on. That we have to open the truth and show people the truth. This is our task in this society. Our task is not to put bombs on buses and in marketplaces. No. Our task is to reform the society by taking the same path as the Imam. And at one time, the Imam was alone. At one time, nobody was looking at him because the louder mouths were the ones that were getting the attention. The ones who were saying, pull out your sword and let's start fighting. They were the ones getting the attention, like the ones who are getting the attention today. But where are they? What will happen to them? The right and the only right to call to arms is the Imam al-Mahdi. Except in a case where you have to defend yourself, your honor and your family. Apart from that, the only right to rise up in arms is the right of Imam Mahdi. The only right we have to stand up for truth and fight for it with force is when our religion is in danger. This is the only time when our society is in danger. Give salawat to the Holy Prophet Muhammad and his family. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. But even then, even when you step aside and you don't get involved in power politics, there is still jealousy. There is still jealousy for you. And that jealousy was manifested in the attitude of Hisham, the Abbasid Khalifa of the day. He could not tolerate the profound respect and the knowledge of the Imam. It is said that one day Hisham even invited the Imam to do some archery, thinking, well, he's home studying and stuff like that. He's teaching and he's doing this and that and the other. He can't shoot no arrow. He doesn't know how to fight. But they don't know that all of our Imams have the spirit of a hider in them, even though they might not raise a sword. And that's how we should be. And it's sad to watch a whole lot of our Shia brothers walking around all overweight and all weak. You're going to do something about this. So Hisham invites him to do some archery. And the Imam showed them up. Because every arrow was hitting the bullseye. And Hisham was upset. Because he wanted the Bani Umayyah to look better than the Banu Hashim. Because the Banu Umayyah were out there fighting all the time. They were fighting all the time. And then in argument of knowledge, the Imam showed him up. To the extent that Hisham harbored an enmity in his heart and decided that he would have the Imam killed. So with the aid of Ibrahim al-Walid, the Imam was poisoned. When the Imam was poisoned and he suspected the effect of the poison on him, it is said that he ran to Fatima bint Hussein, the very same Fatima, the daughter of Hussein, and all he said to her was, I have completed 58 years of age. And she understood. Because there's a hadith by Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, alayhi salam, who said that his father told him that Imam Ali alayhi salam was killed at 58. His father, Ali ibn Hussein, was killed at 58. and he would pass away at 58. In the most painful circumstances, a pain so great that the Imam almost could not bear it, he died on the 7th of Dhul Hijjah. Assalamu alayka, ya Muhammad Al-Baqir. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.